It's my absolute pleasure to be here tonight to talk to everyone about Reading for Pleasure. For the School Library Association, Reading for Pleasure is an absolute core activity. And for personal reasons, I'm one of 4 siblings, and I was the only one not to have dyslexia or dyslexic tendencies. So I've always been aware of the difficulties that come with that, and really keen to make sure that reading is accessible for absolutely everyone. And it's absolutely great because the core of Reading for Pleasure and best practice for reading for pleasure, it actually means that reading is accessible. So we're going to start by looking at what is meant by reading for pleasure and looking at why it's important, and then moving on to some of the more practical things we can do before finishing with by taking a look at some of the resources and technology that can help. So my next slide, which doesn't seem to be moving at all. Let me just reload these, sorry.
That's fine, Alison, these things happen.
Don't know why, it's working fine 10 minutes ago.
I know, it's always the way.
It's just testing us to see how in the routine we are.
It is. We are cool under pressure.
So I firstly want to say, don't panic, guys, don't try and take notes, and know that this is a horrible slide and goes against everything that presenting a PowerPoint should be. So don't panic too much. The link at the bottom is a link to where you can download a whole load of research into Reading for Pleasure. But the point of this slide is simply to show that there's a really strong evidence base for the impact that Reading for Pleasure can have. And this is just some of the research into it. And these are some of the main takeaway points. So I'll just give you a minute to have a look at those. So the benefits of Reading for Pleasure are really broad, and this means, and the research is unequivocal, you know, the research shows nothing but positive outcomes from Reading for Pleasure. So it's really hard to argue with the fact that it's important. But this is one of my favourite quotes, and I'm just going to let you read it. So this is a quote from some research from 2007, and reciprocal and exponential. I mean, that's just phenomenal. You know, reading helps reading. It's something that benefits itself, and the benefits of that never end. You know, that's just a really incredible point and something I really like. And I think that giving the children the ability to want to read for this reason is just incredibly, incredibly important. And the previous research that we looked at on the other screen showed some of the benefits. These are some more benefits that are split into the different outcomes in different areas. So health and well-being, intellectual, personal outcomes, social outcomes. And having looked at the kind of huge range of benefits that come with Reading for Pleasure, and that didn't even touch on the more practical things. So both the question styles in SATs and GCSEs are taxing currently. You know, GCSEs are written for a reading age of 15. So anyone who isn't at that chronological reading age is going to struggle. And this isn't just in English either, and I think this is something really important. It's across the curriculum. It doesn't matter what subject you're taking that GCSE in, those questions will be written for that age and for that ability. So it can be a really fundamental barrier. And I think one of the things that is really important about Reading for Pleasure is the fact that if we can get children to want to do something that is going to help them so much, it's just really important. And I think this is just shown really, really well, illustrated really well by a conversation I had with a head of a school. He was a geography teacher, and he'd spent 5 weeks on this particular topic, just drilling at home, going through all the different kind of concepts and all the different terminology and everything like that. He knew his kids knew that content. And then when they sat their exams, none of them got that question right. And it was a high mark question. And it was a statement followed by the word elucidate. And none of them knew what elucidate meant. So they didn't answer the question correctly. So none of them scored the points that they could have done. And I think reading is something that actually is growing quite a lot. There's a lot of new research coming out to do with kind of cognitive psychology, and a lot of kind of investigations are making us think about reading in a slightly different way. And a really amazing book on this topic is The Reading Mind by Daniel T. Willingham. And in it, he goes through the processes of what actually happens in our minds when we read, and he breaks it all down. And I would highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal book. But in it, he argues what actually has meaning. Is it the letter, the written letter on the page, or is it the sound that that letter makes and we say it in our heads, or we say it out loud? And I think that's a really interesting kind of concept, because actually, if it is the sound, then that potentially makes us think about what reading is in a slightly different way. And in terms of kind of the practices that we do, and, you know, as teachers and school librarians and staff and people who work in schools and with children, you know, this is a really kind of fundamental thing, because our brains can only do one thing at a time. We're actually not very good at multitasking, no matter how good we are at pretending we can all multitask. And some of the things that we do kind of out of habit, for example, reading what's on a slide while everyone reads along, it actually overloads the brain, because it's 2 sets of sounds that are trying to be processed. And for me personally, I've never been able to do that, either focus on reading the slide or I listen to the person talking. And actually there's some cognitive research that shows that actually we can't do that, because it does just exert our short-term memory. And then it also makes me think about things like round robin reading, where a class kind of has, they all have a copy of a book and they take it in turns to read a sentence. And my experience of this as a child was to count how many children were between me and the person currently reading, and then to figure out which sentence was going to be mine, and then to practice reading it until it got to me, so that I wouldn't make a fool out of myself. Now, I was actually a really good reader when I was a kid. To be honest, I didn't do much else other than read. But it was that anxiety of doing it in front of my peer group. And I really wonder whether things like round robin reading are the most effective way of kind of teaching reading or experiencing reading. You know, for me, I loved reading, so that bit of anxiety and concern didn't worry me too much. But if you're already feeling a bit frustrated and a bit anxious about reading, going through an experience like that may only bring out more negatives about reading, which can really change how you feel about it. And it is, you know, I wonder how much experiences like that, if they build, can actually change how someone feels about something altogether. And I certainly don't think it leaves people with a good kind of positive feeling. And as I said, there's lots of research coming out at the moment, and comprehension is a very important part of reading. And the Institute of Education found that when they analysed the scores of nearly 11,000 14-year-olds, the researchers found that the teenagers who read for pleasure every day understood 26% more words than those who never read at all in their spare time. And teenagers who grew up in book-loving homes knew 42% more words than their peers who didn't have access to books at home. And I think that's quite staggering, and I think that's quite important for us, that hold on to. You know, the importance of access to books is vital. And even when taking into account other factors like parents' qualifications and their profession, and even cognitive tests taken by the teenagers when they were 5, teenagers who read for pleasure still got 12% more words right. And those from book-rich homes scored 9% more. But I don't think it's just having access to books. Both cultural context and background knowledge can really impact someone's ability to read and to engage with a story. For example, you know, if you don't know what the Tube is and your book is set in London and uses the underground as a scene, as a background, you won't be able to build the world, you won't be able to connect with it in the same way. And without that ability, it kind of destroys that special connection between the book and the reader. You know, it's a mysterious and mystic thing, but reading is very much a two-way connection, and both parties kind of give equally to that relationship that enables them to build that world. And similarly, you can't take something from a book if you don't know. You know, reading is all about inferring, you know, being shown something and not necessarily told what it is. So if you struggle to read body language and you don't know what body language does or what it's indicating, no matter how good the description of someone behaving in a particular way, you might not be able to infer what's actually happening. And I think these are really important things to take into account when you are recommending books. If they don't have that background knowledge to build that world, they won't be able to engage with it, and they won't be able to enjoy it in the way you might want them to. I also think it's incredibly important to remember that reading is a complex skill. And for me, the analogy that really works is it's very similar to learning how to drive. When I was learning how to drive, I was overwhelmed by how many different things you had to do all in one go. And now I don't even think about it, it's just natural, very similar to riding a bike. You really struggle with all the different elements that go with it, but once you've got it, you've got it. And this, for me, is a really fantastic illustration of exactly how many different strands go into reading. And it's going to be very hard for someone to read for pleasure if one or two or more of these elements are out of sync. And I think, you know, that idea of reading is complex, is very hard for people who are kind of literate to hold on to. And sometimes it's very easy to take reading for granted. But I think this is really important to remember and builds into this context of how we kind of engage with children about their reading. I mean, I was in a bookshop a couple of weeks ago, and there was a parent telling a child that they couldn't have the book that they'd chosen because it was too young. It's too young for them. And I think for me, I just, you know, I struggle with how that is going to impact their kind of power to choose what book they read. And it adds an element of embarrassment. What's the right book? What's the wrong book? But also rereading is a comfort. It's something that a lot of adults do. And it's a fundamental core, a way of solidifying learning. If you're reading something for the first time, you might be more focused on decoding it at a very basic level in terms of phonics, or focusing on the kind of the grammar and the flow and the way that the book works. And actually, if you then go back and reread it, you freed up that brain space to then engage with the underlying levels more. And I think that's particularly poignant for children. You know, they are still learning how to do this. And similarly, moving on from my bike riding analogy, I heard Prue Goodwin speak, and she likened it to removing the stabilizers as soon as someone has learned how to ride. You know, children need that experience to go back and to consolidate what they've learned. And I'm not saying at all that children should be able to just reread the same book until they are 18 at all. But reading is complex, and it's one that's built up from multiple elements. And it's up to us as the adults that surround those children to guide them out of their comfort zone by building their confidence and then inducing them up with enthusiasm, and by offering them things that tempt them, not simply telling them that they've chosen the wrong book. And reading for pleasure is actually quite a lot about barriers. So when we're talking about reading for pleasure, the most important thing is the individual. It's that child and identifying their barriers to reading for pleasure. And barriers can be a whole range of things. They can be physical, perceived, cultural, or anything that prevents someone from reading for pleasure. And some barriers stem from the child, so it could be their attitude, their reading ability, while some could stem from the book, the typeface, the spacing, the font, and some combine them, so the vocab or the background needed to access the book. And many of them can have more than one in play at a time. And I think one of the most important things we can do is identify what is stopping that child from engaging with reading for pleasure, regardless of their age, and actually help them to get over it. I don't know if many of you have seen it, but there's a small independent publishers called Knights Of, and they've just released their Christmas advert in inverted commas. And it shows a boy, and he's saying in response to whether he's asked, do you see yourself reflected in books? And he's saying, no, they have better skin than me. They have better skin than me. And I think we just need to be very aware that not seeing yourself reflected in books is a barrier in its own right. And that applies to lots of things, definitely ethnicity, also people with disabilities very rarely crop up in children's fiction. People with dyslexia, very rarely do you get a main character with additional learning needs. So making sure that your recommendations are diverse can really help. Luckily, reading for pleasure is naturally inclusive. It cannot be taught. You can't just tell someone how to read for pleasure. And in order to do that, in order to get them to read for pleasure, the power and control is with the child. It's their choice. It's about enabling them to find the thing that makes them want to carry on reading. And there should be diverse and inclusive resources to support them and that enable them to go on a reading journey. I was recently talking to someone, and they had parents' evening, and at their parents' evening they were told that the school offered a wide choice of reading materials. And when they kind of questioned it a little bit, it turned out that all of the books that were on offer for this child all came from one reading scheme. And that's not diverse. That's not going to be inclusive. And in this case, it was actually hampering that child's reading, not only journey, not only the breadth of books they were getting to explore, but also their reading development. They had stopped reading because there was nothing there that interested them. So for me, the reading for pleasure and the reading attainment are very much intertwined. The more they do it, if they're doing it in the right way and with the relevant support, the better at it they'll become. And the more ideas and concepts they learn. And that builds to a much broader worldview and engagement with learning. So that's kind of the theory side of things. So we're going to move on to what can actually be done to help. So the first thing, and this cannot be underestimated, is being a reading model. Whether you're in school, whether you're at home, whoever the children are that you're engaging with, you need to show them actively that you are a reader And in some cases, for some teachers, this will mean faking it. As I used to say, fake it until you make it, to what the teachers I used to work with. Until they found a book they actually wanted to sit and enjoy, they should try lots of them. Because children notice, you know, there have been lots of beautiful comments now that we're coming to the end of term of children that have been posted on Twitter. And some of them were saying, Miss, everyone else just says they like reading, but I know you do because you're the only one that comes in with a book. And it's that they notice this thing, so you have to mean it. So yes, having posters on the door saying what I'm reading and then rating it is absolutely great. But having books on your desk, walking into class with a book, you know, maybe having a book that you've loved for a long time, your favourite book, showing that you are a reader, discussing things that you've read is really important. You've probably picked up that this is a core principle of reading for pleasure, allowing pupils to choose what they want and listening to them if they say they don't like something or they're struggling with it. And sometimes it is kind of mixed, and sometimes it does make life kind of slightly harder, but you can't blanket stereotype anything. It all comes back to that pupil and to that individual. What are their likes? What are the things that make them tick? Because that's going to be the thing that induces them to read. If reading is hard when you're learning to read, and if it's something that you struggle with, then there's got to be some inducement. There's got to be something that goes, actually, this is worth it, because at the end, I'll know more about something that I love. Discussing the books. So talking about reading is actually as important for reading progression and reading attainment as reading is. It's kind of very hard to kind of build one up without the other. And actually, it creates these really important reading relationships, and they can work in beautiful ways. So they can create a real bond within a class because the class is going through the shared reading experience at the same time. And it can create real bonds between peers. Oh, I've read this book, it was hilarious, you should read it. And also between staff and children, or parents and children. That kind of dynamic where you've loved something and you share it, and then they read it and they love it too. That's really central, and can really generate a lot of positivity and a lot of positive feelings about reading. And part of that is about reading to them. So if it was up to me, every year group would be read to up to year 10. It's such a fundamentally important thing, because you can choose what you read to them. So you can give them some time to relax, give them an easy read, in inverted commas, time to chill and reflect. You can give them something that you know is going to stretch them a little bit. Read them something where the grammar works in a slightly different way, where the flow works in a slightly different way. You can give them something that is just going to change how they think about reading and writing. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of own. You know, we have the ability to introduce children to a whole range of books and resources by reading to them. So engaging the wider community. If you're building a reading culture, if you're trying to say that reading is important and it is everywhere, then engaging the wider community is definitely something that you can do. So their friendship group, you know, are there any kids in there that do read or don't read? Are there any things that you can do to support them in their reading? Is it something that's being done at school? and having these conversations so that actually we're being more open about reading is a priority, and reading for pleasure is a priority. And then building in activities. So one of the fundamental things that I would recommend is having a kind of a reading for pleasure lesson, where some of that time is given to reading, some of that time is given to finding new books, and some of that time is given to doing activities around that book. And there's a whole range that you can do that just allow people to access reading and the books in a slightly different way. So for example, you could do an activity where you kind of chart how the main character feels at different points throughout the book, and then get pupils to recommend songs that go with those. You know, what would this character be listening to at this point in the book? And that is an activity that it's about the reading and it's about the book, but it allows someone who maybe isn't as interested in reading but does really like music, it gives them a way in, gives them a different way to think about it. So when it comes to buying books, we need to be really sure that we are buying books with the children in mind. So once you've had those conversations with the children, just bringing those to the forefront of your mind. I know children who didn't like reading books where the lines were too close together. So I used to search for books that were spaced out better on the page. And I always think I know that it's much harder these days with, you know, it's so easy to buy books online, but having a book in your hands and judging it. I know some books that are made for reluctant readers, in inverted commas, but the paper is so thin, you can see the words on the other page through the paper. And if you're struggling to read, if you don't like reading and you're struggling to read, that kind of duplicate layer where the paper is almost like tracing paper, that's not going to help, that's not going to support them. So actually having a physical look at the books where possible is really important. Ebooks can be really amazing. They've kind of had a mixed take up in schools, partly because publishers are not entirely on board with school libraries lending ebooks, but they have some really important features, including notes. So a lot of the suppliers of e-library with ebooks to school libraries, they now allow teachers to add notes. So if you have a book that you think is going to be a good fit for a child, but there's this one bit that you're not sure they're going to get to grips with, you can add in the notes for that section. So then when they come across it, they've got that background there. So it doesn't disrupt the reading too much. It doesn't disrupt the world building. It's just a really nice way of of giving that extra support. And I think, you know, a lot of the things that some physical books will struggle with, ebooks can get around. So that space element, you know, most of them you can space the books out slightly more. The paper thickness then isn't an issue. Whiteness you can control, and the glare you can control. But I would say it does depend on the ebook as well. A lot of ebooks are done with books which are out of copyright, which is fantastic. In most cases, these are then just PDFs, which then don't give you that control. So it does come down to kind of getting what you pay for in some respects as well. And then intervention versus pleasure. So there is a temptation in school because time is so pushed and there's so much to do. If you manage to carve out space for reading for pleasure, there is then a temptation to pull children who are struggling for whatever reason or who need additional support, to pull them out of those lessons to give them that intervention. And actually, I think that can be really counterproductive, because if you're pulling them out of something that they would enjoy, that would make them feel really positive about reading, to do something that is maybe going to bring out their anxiety or their frustration, we need to just make sure that there's a balance there and that one is not always replaced with the other. Sorry if you can hear me coughing. I am struggling slightly with a cold, but we are getting there. So I'll just let you read these while I have a drink. Okay, so word families, this is something that I used to do as a competition, and that is actually really, really beneficial. So introducing children to families of words at the same time. By families of words, I mean words where their meaning and spelling is linked. So like audio, auditorium, audible, those kinds of families. And that can actually be really helpful, because then it helps them recognise those and helps them remember the sound that goes with that. And it particularly if you start off with those simpler ones like audio, and then build them up to the longer ones, it just means when they come across those longer words when they're reading, it doesn't throw them off in the same way, and they've already got an idea of the context. So even if they don't know exactly what the word means, they've got a stronger sense of it. Now, this next one is actually a tip that I was given by a teacher I used to work with who was dyslexic. And she said that she found it really helpful when the beginning of the book was read to her. And it's then something that I started doing with the children, and it did make a really big difference. So particularly with our dyslexic children, it just really helps kind of give them that firm foundation. It can be quite overwhelming when they're starting a new book, and they really kind of, I think it helped them feel more kind of safe. Actually, we could do it, and we could do it together. And particularly the names of characters, who in books, they can be completely random, and not fit with any kind of known phonics, or you can't break them down in the way you should be able to with any other words. So it kind of just gives them that solidarity, to kind of then go on with the rest of the book. And I think sometimes it's as much as, and I think this is something that we maybe struggle with, is this idea of, we don't have to be perfect at everything we do. And sometimes it is just about finding it out. And I think sometimes that was what helped them feel better as well. If there were words in there that I didn't know how to pronounce, it's then much more of a shared experience. And then we've got The Rights of the Reader, which is a phenomenal book, and also a phenomenal poster, illustrated by Quentin Blake. And I think those really solidify the main points, and how we can really make sure that every child can access reading for pleasure. So before we move on to the next slide, I'd just like to play a game with you. It's not a test, because I won't see your answers, so don't panic. So I would like you, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write down 5, or think of 5 children's books. Okay, so if you've got 5, well done. I'd now like you to cross out any that were published when or before you were a child. So if you've got any in there that you read as a child, you need to be crossed off. And then can we cross off all the fiction? So if you can comment and let me know how many you've got left, that would be quite interesting, because book knowledge is an incredibly important thing, and unfortunately we're kind of somewhat going against the grain apparently. Children's books only get 3% of all book reviews that are published in national media, and books never feature on the entertainment news on the radio. It's a huge bugbear of mine. It's one of the, biggest forms of entertainment, and it just doesn't feature. So, how are staff or parents supposed to know what's out there? And I think that is something that is really important, because we can't recommend books. We can't find the right book for the right child if we don't know what books are out there. So the SLA, this is one of the things that we do and that we support our members with. And so this is an example of one of our resources. It's a reading grid, and despite its unattractiveness, it is incredibly useful. So at the bottom you've got different genres, and then we've mapped them out in rough reading ages from 0 to 5 all the way through to adult. And obviously, reading ages are quite a flexible thing anyway, but it just gives you a kind of idea of where they sit. And then some of them are hyperlinked to reviews or to book trailers, which are phenomenal and great for students. And so this is just one of the resources, as well as our kind of book reviews that we do.
Alison, we've had some feedback from our listeners. Everybody except one said they had nothing left, and Joe said that they had Ripley's Believe It or Not, so that was the only book.
Oh, amazing. Those Ripleys are fantastic. And thank you for that, Donna. That's really, really cool. And I think it just really highlights that sometimes when we think that we kind of have books that we'd recommend, sometimes just because of our internal likes, they can fall into quite narrow parameters. And so just being aware of those is hugely helpful. And if it makes you all feel better, I asked the same question yesterday to 100 trainee teachers who were all in their kind of, early to mid 20s, and they had exactly the same. So it is just something that we need to really kind of seek out, what are those graphic novels that are really good for primary schools, or, what are those non-fiction books and those information books that are really worth buying and engaging with. So thank you for that feedback, Donna. So I thought it'd be useful to just highlight some of the resources that are really useful. So Barrington Stoke, if you haven't come across Barrington Stoke, they are a phenomenal publisher, absolutely incredible. They specialise in books for dyslexic children. And at the top right of the slide, they've recently started doing classic books, which are set text for GCSEs, and they are just brilliant. One of the students that I used to work with said that it had just absolutely changed her GCSE because she finally had this book that she could actually read. And the thing that I like about Barrington Stoke is they work with your kind of headline authors, sorry. So all of the kids who were reading, oh, I'm reading this Tom Palmer book, it's all about rugby. And Barrington Stoke worked with Tom Palmer, and he's written amazing books for Barrington Stoke as well. So it removes all of that stigma, because they're reading the same books effectively, they're reading the same authors, and there's nothing to stop. And in fact, I would strongly recommend that other children and other adults read Barrington Stoke books as well, because they are just absolutely brilliant. Ransom are another publisher who specialise in kind of dyslexic books. So their kind of graphic novel series, Boffin Boy, is there. Knights Of is the publisher I mentioned earlier, who specialise, or not specialise, but they're working really hard to make sure that BAME children are represented in children's books, and BAME authors are given contracts and write books, because there was some research that showed that only 3% of children's books in the UK had a BAME character in, which is really quite shocking. So they are doing fantastic work. And Latana and Tiny Owl Publishing, also both independent publishers that are just producing beautiful books. And then if you did want to increase your book knowledge, there are some organisations there who are absolutely worth looking at. Book Trust is a charity. They are currently running this amazing campaign to give books as Christmas presents to children who don't own books at home. So that is worth a look. Carousel is a magazine. It gets posted to you, and I think it's an under £20 for the year. So definitely worth a look. Lots of children's books, articles and interviews with authors and that kind of thing. And I won't go into the other three because we are running short of time, but they are all worth a look. The Reading Zone is doing a mini challenge over the winter. If you know what the summer reading challenge is, then they do a mini one over the winter holiday. So do have a look at that as well. And then in terms of technology, we mentioned ebooks earlier. So ePlatform does ebooks, it also does e-audio books. So if playing an audiobook or listening to an audiobook is something, you know, if you want your children to be able to borrow those, then they are worth a look. And Sora, which is the school's version of Overdrive, which is a huge American company, and they've just today been given an award, so that's phenomenal. And then one thing that SLA has been working on with a partner called Bounce Together is Wellbeing Through Reading, and this is a survey platform where you can take multiple surveys and you can add your own, but it's preloaded with an attitude to reading survey that helps you find out how children feel about reading, and it's also preloaded with surveys about well-being, so you can find out how children feel about their sense of well-being. So that might be worth looking into. And then Adam, I am going to hand over to Adam, who's going to introduce us to Lex-plaw.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alison. What a fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed that. And I've got to say, you beat me as well. I didn't have any books left and crossed at the end there. So fantastic. So thank you for the BDA for having me on, and thank all of you for tuning in to listen. This is my first webinar, so I'm very excited. So as the slide says, I'm Adam Luxford. I'm the Systems Manager at Fremantle Academy in Southampton. And I've been asked here today just to share my experiences with using Lex-plaw in our school. So I thought I would start off by just briefly kind of explaining what Lex-plaw is, what it does, how we use it in school, and the effects that we're seeing since bringing the system in. So Lex-plaw is a new technology that is based on research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. which is the provider of the Nobel Prize in Medicine. So it's a technology that uses eye tracking hardware and artificial intelligence to be able to help us identify reading difficulties, and it also determines a reading ability. So there's a lot of kind of big words, a lot of technical words there, but just to kind of describe what it is, you will have a screen which one of your pupils will read some text off, and it has an eye tracker attached to the bottom of that display. The eye tracker is just some small cameras that track the eye movement of the pupil while they're reading the text. So when they read through the text, the eye trackers are watching where their eye moves, and this information is then sent off and put through some really high-tech, fancy artificial intelligence systems, which can then give us back a reading ability for that child. So how we use it in school, at the beginning of the term, we will test. Well, I say test. We don't like to say test with the children because it's a very kind of laid back experience to go through. We'll sit down with each child from years 2 to years 5, and we'll run through procedures. So the child will sit in front of the screen. They will read 3 pieces of text. While they're doing this, the eye tracker will monitor their eyes just to see where it's going while they're reading the text. Then once we've gone through this, which usually takes about 2 to 5 minutes per child, we can log on to the online portal, and it will give us that child's reading ability. So it will give us a range of from below to below average, average, above average, and high. It also gives it a percentile score, which is very nice. So we've got that information there in the portal, and we can just check to see how they're getting on. So the effects that it's had in school, well, the first thing we've noticed is, as I mentioned before, running through the examination with a child only takes about 2 to 5 minutes. So it's extremely speedy to sit down, read with that child, and to get all this information back. So it will give you their child's reading ability. It will give you lots of other statistics such as their reading speed, saccadic length, which is kind of based on their fluency, and fixation, so how long they're looking at certain parts of the word, which kind of helps us understand their decoding. Gives us all of this information back just from sitting down with a child, maybe 2 minutes. So the amount of time that it's saving our teachers has been phenomenal, really. That at the beginning of the term, we will have all this information at our teachers' fingertips, so it gives them more time to be in the classroom where they're needed, really. So that has been the first thing that we've kind of noticed from Lex-plaw. The other thing that's been really good in my experience is that while the child is reading to you, you can watch their eye movement actually as it goes across the screen as they're reading the text. One piece of text they'll read out loud, and another piece of text they'll read silently in their head. So while they're reading in their head, you can still see where their eyes are going and their movement across. So this is really fantastic to be able to see this happening live in front of you, and it really gives you an insight into where the child, areas they find easy, areas they might be struggling in, and it's just kind of a really cool technology thing to have that available to us. It's been really kind of useful to have this information available to us straight away on the portal. We like to test every child at the start of the term. So we'll do that at the beginning of the autumn term, beginning of the spring term, and then the summer term. And that way we've got a really nice way of showing their reading progression throughout the year. It's also a very nice way of displaying information to not only governors and heads of year, but also to parents. It's a really interesting tool to share with them. So it's great to be able to have all of that, like I say, with no real admin work from ourselves. Like I say, the tool is there to help us determine their reading ability, but it might also identify any reading difficulties that child is having. And an area that we've seen some kind of exciting results from is that it can also pick up any sight or particular vision difficulties they might be having. as I say, when the child is reading, you can see their eye movement across the screen. So we've had children in our school, when reading, you could see their left eye was kind of doing all the work, reading the actual text, while their right eye was maybe kind of way off the text, the side kind of not really engaging. Kind of based from this results, we could kind of recommend that the child goes and sees a optometrist, and since then they've had a pair of glasses. So this has been a kind of a really good kind of benefit, that not only are we using a tool that's kind of helping our teachers be able to put in place the best interventions to help children reach kind of a good reading age, but it's also kind of highlighting anything that might have been stopping that child physically from getting there. As I've mentioned, we do that at the start of the term, and we get a reading ability for the child through. So this will be a percentile score out of 100, but it also will suggest reading interventions that can be used with that pupil, and areas based on the results from that test that we can put interventions in place just to help them reach to the next level or overcome any obstacles they might be having. So this has kind of really been fantastic to use with our learning support assistants in school. They can log onto the portal, have a look at the children they're working with, and have a full list of different interventions they can try. We can put those in place, and then the next term, when we test the child at the beginning of the term, we get their percentile score back, and we can see just how effective these interventions have been. So it really takes the pressure off the teachers and LSA not having to kind of write up all the results. They're doing kind of what they need to be doing, spending time listening to the children read. A nice benefit as well is that as this test is performed for children from years 2 to 5, it's giving us a really objective overview. As all children are going through the same process, it's not going to be subject to when teachers do their own assessment. Obviously, we all kind of work from the same pattern, but everyone has their own way of working. But with this tool, it's a completely subjective view, you can see, with no biasing. It's really kind of highlighted some very interesting cases where there have been children that have teachers have had thought very high readers because they are so vocal and passionate storytellers. However, when they come to read, particularly reading silently when they're not reading out loud, there have been kind of the results, they haven't been as high as expected. So it's been really interesting to see the kind of relationship between reading out loud, which a lot of our children are used to doing, because we would read textbooks out loud and you'd have to kind of read out loud in class, to reading silently in your head. So see the relationship between those has been absolutely fantastic. So it's just been a very good experience with ourselves and Lex-plaw. A lot of really interesting usage of this new tech, and it's something I personally would like to see kind of rolled out to more schools, because I think it's been such a boon to us that I can imagine lots of schools out there could really benefit from something like this. I think that kind of sums up everything I wanted to share with you guys regarding my experiences. So I will pass back now. I don't know if we've got any time for questions.
Yes, we do, Adam, and thank you for that. That was a great explanation, I think. So we start with a question from Tom, and he says, Adam, how can I find out more about Lex-plaw? Perfect.
Excellent. As we speak, it appears in front of us.
As if we planned it.
Yeah. Look at
Fantastic.
that, the magic of webinars. So yes, so on the left-hand side at the top of that slide, there's the email address, there's the website. One thing actually I will add, kind of as part of that question, the contact that I've had with Lex-plaw since we signed up has been fantastic. As a systems manager for our school, I'm kind of responsible for buying into lots of services, and I'm sure those of you out there kind of who've been in a similar position have experienced situations where you've maybe bought into a service that is all singing or dancing, and then once you've settled in, you found out you have a problem. It's been very difficult to get hold of anyone who wants to listen. But I've got to say, Lex-plaw's after-sale care have been really good. So I'm sure if you drop them an email there at that address, they'll be able to give you all the information you need.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Tom, hopefully that answers your question. For all our listeners, the guys are kindly going to share their slides, so you don't worry about making notes, you'll get these slides, and also a recording as well of this session, because there's lots of fantastic information there. So without any further hesitation, let's get on with some questions. We'll get through as many as we can. So we've got the first question from Sauri. Good evening, Sauri. They say, how important is it choosing texts for children to read independently? Because nowadays they read all kinds of nonsense. So, Alison, I think we'll start with you. Does it matter if they're reading nonsense, or do we need to be helping them to choose?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by nonsense. If, you know, it's not something that is going to kind of challenge them, but it's something that they enjoy, I would say kind of let them get on with it in a kind of supported way. I would say if we're talking about nonsense that they're reading online, I would say that then kind of finding non-fiction books that you can feed them on the same or a similar topic could be really helpful. And I think, you know, when we get into the area of kind of the nonsense that we all encounter online, it's about giving them the skills to identify it as nonsense. So that is something that school librarians should be able to help you with. But yeah, I mean, if it's something that they're enjoying, then kind of, as I said, I think if they're enjoying the reading process, that's great. And it's up to us to kind of tempt them. So it's somewhat about marginal gains. So you might want them reading something completely different, but let's find something that is fairly similar to start with. And then kind of ease them in the direction that you want them to go in. Does that? I hope that helps.
Yes, no, that's great. Thank you, Alison. And Sari's saying thank you as well. So we also then have, I know you'd mentioned this evening between fiction and non-fiction, and Christelle is asking what kind of balance should children have between fiction and non-fiction?
I think it depends on the child. So there is some research, and stereotypically, it would indicate that boys tend to prefer non-fiction, and girls prefer fiction. I definitely know of cases where that's not the case. And there's also some circumstances with children who find it hard to identify sorry, my brain has gone completely blank. But so some children who take things quite a lot really struggle with fiction because they can't dig down to the levels that sometimes you need to get the most out of it. In terms of kind of school libraries, the recommendation from the SA is 50-50. I stand by that because that is, you know, having information books there is important, not only for reading for pleasure, but curriculum support as well. But it does depend on the child. And I mean, there are some books that kind of blend. So there's a series written by Lucy Hawking, which is fiction, but because it's science fiction, it's got chapters of the actual science is explained. So those books are out there, and also graphic novels. You can get graphic novels which are fiction and non-fiction content. So you can sometimes blend and kind of, again, entice children out of those kind of reading habits. But the skills that you get with reading fiction and reading information books are very, very different. So all children should be doing both. And I'd also add to that newspapers, that earlier get children reading newspapers and engaging with that kind of content better, really.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Adam, I think this may be a question for you. One of our listeners has said, reading is more than decoding. Does the Lex-plaw programme look at comprehension also?
Yes, so there is an aspect in there for comprehension. So during the examination, they'll read 2 texts, one out loud and one in their head, and afterwards there's a series of comprehension questions just to see how well they've understood that text. Again, this information is stored on the online portal, so you can kind of go back and check and add that to their kind of you can bear that in mind when you're looking at their reading ability. I know that at the minute the focus on Lex-plaw is kind of on the reading ability. Like I say, there is some comprehension there, but I believe it is something that they are looking to develop into further.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Adam. And we've had some questions, people asking about cost. This probably isn't the time to discuss that. I suggest, guys, if you want to find out more about the cost of Lex-plaw and some of the logistical side of it, please do reach out to the team. The email is there, hello@lexplaw.com, and they'll be able to provide more details. We'll end with one more question then. It's kind of about technology, I guess. It's from Andrea, and she's asking, Alison, do you think listening to audiobooks has as much benefit as reading a text?
Thank you for asking this question. It's one of those things where I was like, I should have said that. Yes, I do, absolutely. So when you think about how we learn language, we don't learn it from reading. You know, babies aren't sat there reading books. We learn it through listening. And actually, we need to encounter a word at least 3 times for it to kind of sit and for us to get an understanding of its full meaning. So, you know, that if it goes back to what I had, where what gives us the meaning is the sound. We're getting the meaning and we're engaging with the text, and we are reading. We are. I mean, it's not the kind of reading that is going to help with their GCSE score necessarily, but I do think that when we encounter words through an audible format, you are then more likely to recognise it on the page, even without seeing that. And one, you know, and I don't know who, but likened it to reading Braille. You know, they're not reading the letters, but they're reading. So for me, audiobooks and reading aloud and storytelling is an absolutely fundamental part of encouraging reading, and particularly for children who, you know, find the actual practice of reading, the practicality hard. If you can get them to enjoy stories, because it's about that end point, it's about knowing where you can get to. So if you can give them the joy of reading and give them that connection sense where they're just completely lost in the story and they really need to know what's happening next, and then you give them it's hard now, but that's where we're going, they are more likely to get there.
Fantastic, thanks, Alison. And we have been absolutely overwhelmed this evening with questions. I do apologise. We obviously can't get through them all. What I do suggest is if you have some questions about Lex-plaw, which we've got a fair few, the email address is there, the hello@lexplaw.com. As Adam said, I'm sure the team there will answer anything and everything you want to ask about it. In terms of anything about reading, please do send them through to us here at BDA, to our conference inbox, and we will signpost accordingly. And Alison has kindly provided the website for School Library Association. I know there'll be lots of information there. The slides will come to you, as will this recording. So please do keep in touch with us. That only leads me to say a huge thank you to Alison, to Adam and his colleagues at Fremantle.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and also to Lex-plaw. So lots of thank yous, guys. Do you want to say anything to our listeners before we say goodnight?
Do you want to go, Alison? Sorry, just throw you first.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. It's been absolutely great. And if I can do a slightly cheeky thing, all members of the SLA get a little bit of discount off Lex-plaw. So if you are interested, do check out our website as well. But it's been lovely. And Donna, if there are any questions that you think should come back to me, feel free to send them.
Oh, thank you, Alison. We were hoping you were going to say that, but we never like to put people on the spot. Thank you, that's really kind. So yes, please do send your questions to conference, and we will forward on ones that we feel Alison is better placed to answer. And Adam, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. This has been such a wonderful experience. I'm glad I got to take part. Alison, really fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it. Got a lot from that. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone that listened. And hopefully it was kind of useful for you, what I said. If anyone's got any questions they want to direct to me, Donna, please let me know. And I'm happy to kind of answer any questions.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Okay, well, that just leaves me to say a huge thank you to all of you on behalf of us here at the British Dyslexia Association. And I think other than wishing everybody a great Christmas, we just want to say keep reading, I think, don't we, guys? And keep enjoying books. So thank you, everybody. And we'll be in touch again with the recording of this session. Good night.